This video is going to be a quick rundown of all the major muscles in the human body that are important for bodybuilding, including their functions and some of the fundamental exercises to target them. I have made a video like this before and it's been pretty popular recently, so I'm making an updated version. Alright, let's start with the chest. There are two major muscles in the chest. The first one is the pectoralis major, which has two heads. The clavicular head, which performs shoulder flexion, like raising the arm overhead, like in a front raise. Low to high cable fly is also a really good for this muscle, and incline presses like incline bench press obviously also great as well. And then the other head is the sternal head, which performs humeral adduction, basically bringing the arm across the body like in a chest fly. So a fly is really the purest chest movement, so you should have one of those in your program if you want to maximize your chest growth. And then obviously horizontal presses like bench press, dips and push-ups are really good for the pec major as well. And then the pectoralis minor stabilizes the scapula and pulls it down and forward. And it's not really necessary to isolate this muscle for bodybuilding, but sometimes you need to pay attention to it in a physical therapy context. So overall for chest, you should have some kind of fly, some kind of horizontal press like a bench press, and maybe some kind of incline press. Next, for the shoulders, there are three main heads of the shoulders. The anterior deltoid, which does shoulder flexion and internal rotation, so you can train this very well with front raises and overhead press. Then the lateral deltoid, or the side delt, this does shoulder abduction like in lateral raises, also in upright rows. And then the posterior deltoid, or the rear delt, and this does shoulder extension and horizontal abduction like in reverse flies. Now let's move on to the back. There are loads of muscles in the back. The lats are the one that most people are interested in. The lats do shoulder extension, adduction and internal rotation, so you can train these really well with things like pull-ups, lat pull-downs, pullovers and sagittal plane rows. And the other main back muscle is the trapezius. This is a big muscle and it has three kind of subsections where the fibers run in different directions, so they have slightly different functions. The upper traps do scapular elevation in things like shrugs and kelso shrugs. They're also pretty active in rows as well. The middle traps do scapular retraction, so things like kelso shrugs will hit this probably the best, and then rows are obviously really good too. Chest supported rows are probably technically the best because of their stability, but barbell rows, cable rows and dumbbell rows are all going to work really well. And then the lower traps do scapular depression, like in a straight arm pull down or a scapular pull up. So for the traps, you'll mostly be covered with a kelso shrug and some kind of rows. Then there's the rhomboids, which do scapular retraction and stabilization, and these are hit really well with rows. The teres major does shoulder adduction and extension. You can hit this with lat pull downs and pull ups. It has a similar function to the lats. The teres minor and infraspinatus both do shoulder external rotation. And lastly, the erector spinae, or the spinal erectors, these do spinal extension in things like good mornings, deadlifts and back extensions. Now we'll move on to the arms, starting with the elbow flexors. The main one that everyone knows is the biceps brachii, and the job of this muscle is to flex the elbow, and it also supinates the forearm. You can hit the biceps brachii with any kind of supinated grip curls like barbell curls, preacher curls or dumbbell curls. And there's the brachialis, which sits underneath the biceps brachii, and this is another elbow flexor, and you can target this really well with neutral grip curls like hammer curls. And lastly, there is the brachioradialis, which is mostly on the forearm, and this does elbow flexion, especially when you have a pronated grip like a reverse grip curl, and also during neutral grip curls. So basically, to cover the three elbow flexors, you should have one or two supinated curls like a preacher curl or a barbell curl or a dumbbell curl or a straight bar cable curl, and a neutral grip hammer curl, and that will hit them adequately. And then on the back of the arm, there's the triceps brachii. Triceps meaning three heads, because this muscle has three heads. All three heads of the triceps extend the elbow, but you can bias each head a little bit with different lifts and resistance profiles. The long head is best targeted with tricep extension isolations because it functions as a shoulder extensor, so its activation is suppressed during multi-joint exercises like presses. So something like an overhead extension or a triceps push down with your arm behind the body is really good for the long head. Then the lateral head and the medial head are both hit very well during presses like closed grip bench press or overhead press or incline press. Basically, for triceps, you should have at least one kind of press, maybe with a tricep bias like a closed grip bench press, and definitely one elbow extension isolation like a push down or an overhead extension. The forearms are not a super popular muscle to train, but they can make a big difference in your physique. The wrist flexors flex the wrist, obviously, so you can train these with wrist curls. Then you have the wrist extensors on the top of the arm, forearm, which extend the wrist so you can do wrist extensions for these. And then you've got things like pronators, which rotate the forearm. Now I'll talk about the core muscles. The main one that everyone knows, the six pack, this is the rectus abdominis, and its job is spinal flexion, like during a cable crunch or a seated ab crunch machine. A hanging leg raise with posterior pelvic tilt also works well, but then you get the hip flexors involved a bit too. Ideally, you just do pure spinal flexion if you want to isolate the rectus abdominis. The obliques are kind of on the side of the torso, and they do trunk rotation and lateral flexion. So essentially, any exercises that involve rotating the torso like a Russian twist, they will hit the obliques, and then also side bends are another good one. The transverse abdominis does deep core stabilization and abdominal compression. So this is one that you use when you're doing a vacuum pose to kind of tighten up your waist. And then there's the serratus anterior, which is up kind of by your rib cage, and this does scapular protraction and upward rotation. This is important for punching in combat sports, and you can target it with scapular push-ups, which is basically just pure scapular protraction. Moving on to the legs, we have the quads, and as you can probably guess from the name, the quads have 4 heads. First one I'll talk about is the rectus femoris. This is the only biarticular muscle in the quads. That means it crosses both the knee joint and the hip joint, and it performs both knee extension and hip flexion. And what this means is during multi-joint movements like squats or presses, the rectus femoris lengthens at one end and it shortens at the other end, which means it doesn't actually contribute a whole lot during multi-joint movements. So the best way to isolate and really activate the rectus femoris is to use single joint knee extension exercises like the leg extension. And the other 3 heads of the quads, the vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, and vastus intermedius, all perform knee extension, and they're all hit very well during compound knee and hip extension exercises like squats, leg presses, and lunges, and so on. The hamstrings also have 3 main muscles and 4 kind of regions. There is the biceps femoris, which performs hip extension and knee flexion, and this has a long head and a short head. You can hit the long head better by doing seated leg curls, and the short head by doing lying leg curls. And the other 2 muscles are the semitendinosus and the semimembranosus, which both do hip extension and knee flexion. If you want complete hamstring development, include at least a seated leg curl and some kind of hip extension like a back extension or an RDL, and then ideally also a lying leg curl if you have room for it in your program. Then there's the adductors, the adductor magnus, adductor longus, and adductor brevis, and these all do hip adduction and internal rotation, and you can hit these well using the adductor machine. The sartorius is a muscle that people don't often think about. This does hip flexion, abduction, external rotation, and knee flexion. It's not really one that you need to worry about isolating. The glutes contain a few muscles. There's the gluteus maximus, of course, which does hip extension and external rotation, and you can hit this very well with hip thrusts, and RDLs are also very good. And then there's the glute medius and the glute minimus, which do hip abduction or lifting the leg away from the body out to the side, and they do internal rotation. And you can hit this with any kind of hip abduction movement. And then the calves, you've got the gastrocnemius, which does plantar flexion of the ankle and also a little bit of knee flexion, and you can hit this with straight leg calf raises or straight leg calf press. The soleus also just does plantar flexion of the ankle. You can hit this better with a seated leg raise, although for calves, the single best exercise you can do is a straight leg calf raise. That will hit both of the calf muscles if that's all you have time for. And then on the front of the shin is the tibialis anterior, which no one really cares about in bodybuilding, but it's pretty important for like knee health and injury prevention. This does dorsiflexion of the ankle, and you can hit it with tibialis raises. And I'll just finish off with the neck muscles. There are lots of muscles responsible for stabilizing the neck, flexing the neck, extending it, and so on. The most important for bodybuilding and things like combat sports or contact sports are the sternocleidomastoid, which does neck flexion, the trapezius, spinal erectors, and splenius, which do neck extension. Those muscles are on the back of the neck. Lateral flexion is controlled largely by the sternocleidomastoid, but also the scalene muscles, splenius capitis, trapezius, spinal erectors, and rectus capitalis lateralis. Basically, for complete neck development, you should do at least neck flexion, neck extension, and some side neck flexion, and maybe some rotation as well. That is everything I wanted to cover. I hope you found this useful. If you're looking for a program that puts all of these exercises together into a really effective muscle building routine, you can check out my hypertrophy blueprint, which I'll have linked in the description. This is my best bodybuilding program so far, in my opinion. Check that out below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.